My sister raised her champagne glass and smiled like it was a press conference, not my wedding. To the happy couple, Tess said, her voice syrupy and sharp. May your love grow like weeds in the backyard. The room laughed, some genuinely, some politely. I sat there in a second-hand dress with a Costco cake on the table and wished, just once, that my sister could shut up. My name's Francine. I married Boone Vickers in the backyard of my parents' house in Silver Junction, Kansas. It was a hot June afternoon, and my mom was sweating through her silk blouse before the ceremony started. Boone had just come from his shift helping the local VFW with a ramp installation, still smelling faintly of sawdust and sunscreen. I loved him for it. My family did not. Boone served 2 tours in Iraq. He came home with a Bronze Star, a busted knee, and a mild case of PTSD he never talked about. When I told my family I was marrying him, Tess laughed out loud. "You're leaning into the fixer-upper type, huh?" she said. Her husband, Merritt, ran a private equity firm. He'd never carried anything heavier than a golf club. They showed up late for the wedding, of course. Tess entered in a designer dress with their 8-year-old daughter trailing behind like a flower girl in a wedding she wasn't invited to. Merritt didn't take off his sunglasses once. They sat like royalty in the front row, visiting a peasants' festival. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, Tess cleared her throat, not joking, and smiled when everyone turned. "Just allergies," she said. The photographer caught Boone squeezing my hand so hard I thought we'd both lose circulation. After the vows, we moved to the folding tables. There was brisket in foil pans, beer in coolers, and a Bluetooth speaker trying its best against the wind. Tess picked at her paper plate like it was contaminated. Mom kept pulling me aside to whisper, "You can still go back to school. It's not too late." Boone's friends from his unit showed up in polos and jeans, carrying gifts wrapped in grocery bags. They were loud, kind, and clumsy with compliments. They made my mother visibly uncomfortable. One of them, Darius, gave a toast about Boone being the only guy in the squad who still sent his mom birthday cards. Tess rolled her eyes so hard it was practically a seizure. Then came the part no one talks about at weddings. The speech from the bride's father, my dad, Vince Landry, former Marine and now full-time neighborhood curmudgeon, took the mic with a sigh that already felt like a disappointment. "Francine's always been different," he started. "She chose a simpler path than her sisters." My mother nodded, mistaking this for a compliment. "But she's marrying a man who knows the meaning of hard work. So, good luck to them." It was like being honored and dismissed in the same sentence. Boone stayed calm. He always did. When I glanced at him, he mouthed, "Let it go." I tried. But then Merritt shouted from his table, "At least the wedding was cheap." The laughter started again. I didn't toast with champagne. I stood up with a plastic cup of water and said, "To family, and to knowing who really supports you when it counts." The silence was heavy. Tess raised her eyebrows. Merritt coughed into his drink. Boone nodded once. That was enough. Hey, if you've ever had a family member humiliate you at your wedding, or you're just enjoying this story of subtle revenge, hit that like button, drop a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe for more real stories like this one. The rest of the night was a blur. The music kept playing, mainly for the kids running around. Boone's army buddies danced like it was their last day on Earth. Tess left early, muttering something about traffic, even though she lives 10 minutes away. My parents stayed until dessert, then vanished after ensuring I knew where the trash bags were. Boone and I stayed back to clean. Just us and Darius, who insisted on scrubbing the grill. Boone kissed my forehead and whispered, "Don't let them ruin this." "They don't know what we have," I nodded. I believed him. The stars came out while we packed up the folding chairs. Boone pointed to one and said something about constellations, but I wasn't listening. I was just staring at our hands, still linked, still steady, still sure. Boone loaded the last chair into the truck bed, while I stood barefoot in the grass, wondering how long their laughter would stop echoing in my head. I peeled off my dress and tossed it over the armchair. I'd spent a week hemming it myself after buying it secondhand for $80. Mom said it was charming, which in her language meant pitiful. The zipper was already fraying. Boone walked in and kicked off his boots. "Want to shower first?" he asked. I shook my head. I didn't want to wash the day off. Not yet. The next morning, Boone made pancakes. I barely touched mine. My phone was full of photos I didn't want to look at. Boone smiling next to the grill. Boone shook hands with my dad, who looked like he was doing it under court order. Boone laughed with his buddies while Tess scowled in the background. If you looked hard enough, it almost looked like a happy wedding. Later that week, I stopped by my parents' house to drop off a gift someone had left behind. Mom met me at the door in yoga pants and pearls. "You could have just tossed it," she said. "It's a keychain." I handed it over anyway. She didn't invite me in. As I turned to go, she added, "Tess's rehearsal dinner cost 10 grand, you know." I froze. "That's great." "Just saying," she replied. "We put a lot into hers. Yours was sweet." There it was again. That word. Boone never said much when I vented about my family. He'd listen with that military stillness of his. No judgment, no reaction. But I knew it got to him. One night he asked, "Do you ever wish you'd married someone easier for them to accept?" I hated that question. Not because of what it said about him, because of what it said about me. 2 months after the wedding, we got invited to Tess's house for her birthday. I didn't want to go. Boone said we should. "They're your family. We show up. We stay polite. We leave early." That became our rule. Their house was a 2-story brick colonial in Ashbury Hills, where the driveways were longer than our entire street. When we stepped inside, Merritt handed Boone a craft beer as if it were an act of charity. "Enjoy, buddy. It's from Denmark. You probably don't get stuff like this out in the sticks." Boone smiled, took the beer, and didn't say a word. The dining table was a Pinterest board of charcuterie and imported olives. I brought potato salad in a plastic bowl. Tess looked at it like I'd set down a grenade. "Oh," she said. "Is it gluten-free?" I didn't answer. I just set it next to her quinoa bites and moved on. Dinner was a performance. Merritt bragged about quarterly returns. Tess laughed at jokes no one else understood. And my parents nodded like trained seals. Boone sat beside me, listening, observing, occasionally squeezing my knee under the table. I could tell he was counting the minutes. At one point, Merritt leaned back and said, "So Boone, what's next for you? Any big moves, or are you still enjoying the simple life?" Boone didn't blink. "Just built a ramp for a veteran in Willow Creek. Saved him from having to move." Merritt chuckled. "That's cute." My mother sipped her wine like it was a sedative. Then Tess chimed in. "Honestly, Francine, I don't know how you do it. I mean, I could never live like that. Budgeting, grocery lists, peeling coupons. It's so..." She paused, pretending to search for a word. "Resourceful." I felt the heat crawl up my neck. "We're not poor, Tess. We're just not pretending we're rich." Dead silence. Merritt cleared his throat. Dad shifted in his seat. Boone looked at me, not surprised, not alarmed, just present. Tess tilted her head. "I didn't say you were poor, but come on. You've always settled. Even as a kid, you never aimed higher." I could have said 1,000 things, but none would have mattered, so I stood up and started clearing the dishes. When Boone joined me in the kitchen, he whispered, "You don't have to stay in this." I didn't know if he meant the room or the whole damn family. On the drive home, Boone finally asked, "Why do you keep giving them chances?" I stared out the window. "Because I still want them to love me, and every time they don't, I think maybe it's my fault." Boone didn't answer. He reached over, took my hand, and held it until we turned onto our road. The porch light was still on. The house looked smaller than theirs, but somehow more honest. We sat there in the truck for a while, not saying anything. Boone finally said, "You didn't settle. You chose." I nodded. I believed him, mostly. I left the potato salad bowl on their granite counter and never bothered to ask for it back. The next morning, Boone was in the garage sharpening the lawnmower blade like a therapy session. I watched from the kitchen window with my coffee cooling in my hand. His face was calm and focused. the way it always was when something needed fixing, and no one else would do it. I couldn't decide if I admired it or resented it. We didn't talk about the dinner. We didn't need to. That was our thing. Handle the mess, skip the analysis. But something lingered under the silence that day, like a dull ache that didn't want to leave. I vacuumed the living room twice, and still felt like the dust was winning. Boone came in around noon, grabbed a sandwich, and sat across from me at the table. He ate without saying much, just that rhythmic chew that filled the air. Then he finally said, "I think I'm going to call someone at the VFW. See if they need help with the new roof." I nodded. "Yeah, good." What I meant was, "Get out of here. I don't know how to sit with you when ashamed of myself." He left, and I went to the bedroom, opened the closet, and looked at my old grad school acceptance letter. I'd gotten into a master's program in environmental education 6 years ago. Gave it up when Mom had surgery and said she needed help around the house. Tess didn't even visit. I stayed, and I never went back. I kept the letter anyway. Maybe one day I'd believe it still meant something. That night, Boone came home late. He smelled tar and smoke, and I didn't ask what went wrong with the roof. He dropped his boots at the door, limped a little, and walked in. His knee flared up sometimes, especially when he overdid it. He didn't complain. He never did. We sat on the couch, legs touching but not holding. I finally asked, "Do you ever feel like we're just getting by?" He looked at me for a long second. "Sure, but we're getting by together." That's more than most people get. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to wrap myself in that sentence like a blanket, but it didn't stick. Not that night. A week later, Boone got a call from a vet named Kenny. He was in a wheelchair after a stroke, living alone and struggling with the stairs in his house. Boone spent the weekend building him a ramp. I tagged along one afternoon, primarily out of guilt. Kenny offered me lemonade and called me Miss Francine, like I was visiting royalty. His dog barked non-stop. His kitchen smelled like old bacon grease, and I liked him immediately. When we returned to the truck, Boone asked, "Feel better now that you've done your good deed for the day?" He said it with a smile, but I didn't answer. Not because I was mad, because I felt like the worst version of myself for needing someone else's struggle to feel useful. Boone got a small envelope from the Department of Veterans Affairs on Sunday. I found it sitting on the counter when I came in from the garden. He opened it while I sliced cucumbers, said nothing, and then set it down. I glanced at the page. It was about a grant for veteran reintegration projects. Boone had applied months ago for funding to turn our extra acre into a wellness garden and therapy space for local vets. He never told me. "You kept this quiet," I said, holding the paper. He shrugged. "Didn't want to jinx it." "This is huge, Boone. It's just a step. It's more than a step. It's real." He didn't react the way I thought he would. No excitement, no pride. Just a calm certainty, like the future was already happening, and he was just catching up. I stared at him across the kitchen island and realized how much I didn't know about what he was carrying. Maybe that's why I married him. Because even when I was falling apart, he was building something. I folded the letter and tucked it back in the envelope. Boone leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You still think you settled?" I didn't answer. I just walked over, took his hand, and squeezed it like I had at our wedding. Like maybe it was the only anchor we had left that made any damn sense. I watered the garden in silence that evening, letting the dirt and the dusk settle over me like armor. Boone sat on the porch, one boot off, rubbing his knee like he was negotiating with it. I didn't say anything. We were getting good at that, being quiet without being distant. The only sound came from the hose and the occasional creak of the porch swing when Boone shifted his weight. The next day was Thanksgiving. Not my favorite holiday. Nothing like stuffing your face while pretending your family doesn't silently judge every choice you've made since puberty. We had agreed to go, mainly because Audra had texted and said she wanted us there. She was the only one who ever asked us anything without an agenda. We brought a pie, Homemade. Boone peeled the apples and I made the crust. We even used real cinnamon, not the cheap kind. I carried it in, covered in foil like a peace offering. The front door was already open when we arrived. My mom greeted us with that too bright smile she reserved for guests in awkward situations. "You made it," she said. "We were just saying grace," which was coded as, "You're late." We walked into a dining room that looked like a Pottery Barn catalog. Tess was already seated at the head of the table. Her daughter, Savannah, wore a velvet dress and a pout. Merritt stood behind Tess, pouring wine like he owned the place. Audra waved at us from the far end of the table, next to the folding chairs added to make room. Boone and I took the only 2 seats left. Side by side, across from the kitchen door, my dad started the blessing, a disguised monologue about responsibility and tradition. Boone bowed his head respectfully. I stared at the table. Dinner was a full production. Turkey, 3 kinds of stuffing, mashed potatoes, yams with marshmallows, and something gelatinous I didn't trust. Boone tried everything. I stuck to the salad. Then came the photo. It always came after dessert, when everyone was bloated and half drunk. Mom lined us up in front of the fireplace. Tess fixed her lipstick. Audra tucked her hair behind her ears. Boone and I stood at the end, half in the frame. Just like always. "Maybe one just of the kids," Mom said. "You know, for the mantle." Boone stepped back automatically. I grabbed his hand and pulled him back into place. "He's family," I said. "We're not doing this again." Tess laughed. "Relax, Francine. It's just a picture." "No," I said. "It's never just a picture." Everyone froze. Audra looked down at her shoes. Merritt took a sip of wine. My dad cleared his throat, then said, "Let's just take the damn photo." We smiled. Click. Done. Boone turned to me and whispered. I was okay stepping out. I shook my head. "I'm not." Tess turned on the TV in the living room and started talking about ski trips. She and Merritt were planning Aspen for New Year's. Mom nodded along like she'd be invited. My dad asked about interest rates. Boone and I sat on the edge of the couch like kids waiting to be excused. Then Merritt asked Boone, "You still doing those weekend build projects?" "Must be exhausting," Boone smiled. "It helps." "Helps what?" "Keeps my head straight." Merritt nodded like that was interesting but meaningless. Then he turned to my dad and changed the subject. Boone squeezed my hand once under the throw blanket. We didn't stay long after that. In the car, I watched the houses pass by. Big porches, inflatable turkeys, perfectly raked leaves. All of it felt fake. All of it felt designed for a life I was supposed to want but couldn't afford. Even emotionally, Boone finally asked, "You okay?" I laughed. Define okay. Not hiding in the garage with a beer and a bad knee. "Then sure," I said. "I'm okay." We got home and put the pie plate in the sink. Boone sat down and unlaced his boots like he always did, slow and methodical. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "If I hadn't said anything, you'd have stepped out of that photo and never thought twice." "Yeah," he said, "because I know where I stand. I don't need pictures to prove it." I turned off the kitchen light. "Well, I do." He looked up at me, quiet, then said, "Okay." Not angry, not defensive, just honest. And somehow that made me feel worse. Because he wasn't wrong, but neither was I. I lay awake that night, counting every breath like it might keep the resentment from blooming. By morning, I gave up pretending to sleep. I made coffee, fed the chickens, and scrubbed the counters like they'd said something offensive. Boone came in from the barn around 7, kissed me on the cheek, and didn't say a word. His silence didn't bother me. Mine did. I kept thinking about the photo. That stupid fireplace photo with Boone half shadowed in the corner is like a forgotten extra. It wasn't just a picture. It was proof. Proof that no matter how long he'd been part of my life, my family never let him in. Not really. Around 10, Audra called. I didn't pick up. She left a voicemail saying she just wanted to talk and make sure things weren't weird. That phrase stuck with me. Things weren't weird. They were predictable. and I was tired of pretending otherwise. I called her back after lunch. She answered on the first ring. "Hey," she said, too cheerful. "Hey," I said, flat. "About last night." "I know," she interrupted. It got tense. "I'm sorry." Merritt was being a little. "He's always like that," I said. That wasn't new. "I guess I hoped it wouldn't bother you anymore." "That's the problem, Audra. It doesn't bother me. It exhausts me." She was quiet for a beat. "Okay, fair. Why do we keep showing up like they're ever gonna see us differently?" "Because we're still hoping they will," she said, her voice smaller. "You think that, or you just want to keep the peace?" Another pause. "Probably both." We didn't talk long. She said she'd call again soon. I knew she would. I also knew she wouldn't say anything that changed anything. That afternoon, Boone asked if I wanted to drive to the Miller property with him. A vet named Tom Miller donated 2 acres to the wellness garden Boone had pitched in the grant. Boone wanted to scout the layout. "We can bring the measuring wheel," he said. "Get a feel for it." I agreed. Not because I wanted to measure dirt, but being anywhere that wasn't tied to the past felt like air. Tom met us at the gate. He wore a stained ball cap and smelled like chewing tobacco and sunblock. "Glad you're doing something real with the land," he said, patting Boone on the back. "Nobody around here thinks long-term anymore." We walked the property for over an hour, stopping to sketch out zones on the back of a seed catalog. Boone discussed planting lavender rows, raising veggie beds, and creating a shaded walking path. I watched him draw it out like he already saw the future, blooming from nothing. "You really believe in this?" I said on the ride home. "Yeah," he replied. "You don't?" "I do. I think I just forgot I could." Boone didn't say anything to that. He just reached over and squeezed my leg like a reminder. "You're still here, still part of it." That evening, as we put the tools back in the shed, Boone pulled a folded envelope from his back pocket. "This came today." I opened it and saw the logo from the grant board. I skimmed fast. Boone watched me, nervous for once. "You got it," I said, looking up. "They're funding the full pilot." He exhaled and looked down at his boots. "It's real then." "It was real before," I said, "but now they're paying attention." He nodded, quiet. Not overwhelmed, just steady. And I realized that Boone didn't need recognition to believe in something. He just needed soil, tools, and a reason to keep building. Later, I found myself standing in front of the hallway mirror. I looked like someone who belonged in this house, on this land. I just didn't look like someone my family would ever brag about. And maybe I was done caring. I thought about the lavender rows, about the shaded path, about veterans who'd walk it, maybe for peace or something more. I thought about Tom's weathered hand gripping Boone's shoulder, like they shared some code I'd never quite understand but could learn to respect. Then I turned off the light and left the reflection behind. I reached for my phone and deleted the Thanksgiving photo without a second thought. A week later, I got a call from my dad. I didn't recognize the number because he was using the landline at the dealership. When I heard his tight and too polite voice, I knew something was off. "Francine," he said, like I was a client instead of his daughter. "We'd like to have a family dinner, this Saturday." "Who's we?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "Me, your mom, Tess, Merritt, Audra, if she can make it." I paused, staring at a sink full of dishes. "You know Boone and I have plans." "It's important," he cut in. "It's about the family's future." They never used words like that unless something was wrong. Did something happen? There was a silence just long enough to confirm it. "Let's just say Merritt's business has hit a patch. We're reorganizing some assets. We'd like to talk things through, as a family." And there it was, the preamble to a favor. "We'll be there," I said, even though I hated myself for it. Boone didn't argue. He just said, "Let's take both cars," and left it at that. Saturday came with a sharp wind and skies the color of wet concrete. Boone wore his usual, jeans, a flannel, and a tan field jacket. I dressed like someone who had made peace with being underestimated. Clean sweater, hair tied back, nothing flashy. They'd set the table like it was Thanksgiving again. cloth napkins, wine glasses, and even place cards. Merritt's idea of charm always looked like a corporate dinner party trying too hard. We sat through the salad and discussed the weather and gas prices before the shift came. Tess leaned forward, smiling too wide. "So," she said, fingers laced under her chin, "let's be honest. You probably heard some chatter." "About Merritt's firm?" Boone asked calmly. "Yeah, word travels." My father cleared his throat. "It's temporary. A liquidity issue." "It's a $9 million SEC investigation," I said. "That's not a hiccup." Mom flinched. Tess's face tightened like Botox couldn't hold it all in. "We didn't bring you here to argue," Merritt said, steepling his hands like a TED Talk villain. "We brought you here because we believe in solutions, strategic, long-term ones." Boone raised an eyebrow. "And how does that involve us?" Tess spoke up, all charm. "You have something stable, tangible. Your land, your project. You're sitting on equity, on opportunity. And you want us to liquidate it," I said. "No," my dad lied. "We're just asking you to consider leveraging it. Help the family through a tough season." "By handing over our biggest asset," Boone said. "No strings, I'm sure." "It would only be temporary," Merritt added quickly, "until the accounts unfreeze and we can transfer the liability back to us," I said. Audra hadn't said a word until now. Her voice was small. "You wouldn't lose the land, Francine. You'd just be helping cover." I looked at her. Looked. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her jacket was secondhand. The only sister who'd ever apologize for anything was sitting here, letting this madness happen. I turned to my father. "Let me be absolutely clear. You're asking us to risk everything Boone and I built so Merritt can dig out of his own mess." My dad's jaw tightened. "This is about family." "No," Boone said. "This is about entitlement." That was the last straw. My mom burst into tears. Tess looked personally insulted. Merritt went red. "We'll think about it," I said, knowing we wouldn't. Boone stood, pulling out my chair. "Thanks for dinner," he said, voice flat. Outside, the wind had picked up. I watched the bare branches scratch at the dark sky. Boone didn't say anything until we were in the car. Then, "You okay?" I nodded. "They don't get to frame this as loyalty. Not anymore." I watched the lights of their house disappear in the rearview mirror and didn't feel a damn thing. The next morning, Boone brought me coffee and slid the newspaper across the table without a word. The headline read, "Iron Crest Holdings faces regulatory pressure over client losses." Below it, Merritt's name was in bold, like a scar on the page. "I thought they weren't making it public," I said. "They were never going to admit it until it hit the press," Boone replied. "Now it's damage control." He sat across from me, watching my reaction like he expected me to break. Instead, I laughed. "They dragged us through years of snide remarks and pity, and now they want us to prop them up? Boone, if this wasn't my family, it'd be comedy." Boone didn't laugh. He just tapped the page. "They're not done. This is just the first crack." He was right. That afternoon, Audra called. Twice. I let both go to voicemail. The third time, I answered. Her voice was shaky. "Francine, it's bad. Mom's crying every day. Dad's yelling. Tess hasn't left the house in 3 days. Merritt's staying in a hotel." I waited. "They think you're going to help. They're already talking about which loan officer you should call." "That's delusional," I said. "I know," she whispered. "But it's how they've always been. They think you owe them something because you chose peace over ambition." "They never respected our peace," I said. "They just used it as a punchline." There was a pause, and then she said the thing that had been hanging in the air for years. "You know they never thought you'd make anything of yourself. That you married Boone because you couldn't do better." My throat tightened. "And what do you think?" "I think you built something they never could. That's why they're scared." When I hung up, Boone was in the workshop, surrounded by wires and blueprints and coffee cups he'd never remember to throw away. "You think they'll come to the farm?" I asked. He looked up, eyes calm. "They'll come. People like Merritt don't beg over the phone. They show up, dressed like it's a board meeting, thinking their presence is power." I sat on the edge of the table. What if they bring paperwork? Then we hand them a different kind. Boone had never raised his voice at a family dinner. Never fought back when Merritt made digs about his service or his boots or his humble little life. But now he looked like a man sharpening the edge of truth. He reached for a folder on the shelf, thicker than any I'd seen him pull before. "What is that?" "Our insurance," he said. "In case they try to paint us as just a couple of naive farmers sitting on good dirt." Inside were documents, legal, financial, and technical. Company filings, prototypes, patent applications with Boone's name in bold. "You built all this behind the scenes?" "We built it," he corrected. "You kept us grounded while I tested ideas that shouldn't have worked. You kept us going." I flipped through pages with numbers I barely understood. Then, one number stopped me cold. "This is real?" I asked. "Every cent." I set the folder down slowly. "They don't know. They still think we're broken spirit because we don't drive a Tesla and post about Italy." Boone smirked. "Let them think it. Makes what's coming easier." The wind picked up outside, pushing dust against the windows. Boone stood and rolled down the workshop door halfway, expecting a storm that hadn't yet hit. "They'll come here thinking they're saving us," I said. Boone nodded once. "But we've already saved ourselves." I spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning the guest room. Not because I expected company, because I expected a performance. They arrived in a black Lincoln Navigator that kicked up enough dust to look symbolic. Merritt stepped out first, jaw tight, suit jacket crisp. Tess followed in heels, her expression already sour. My parents trailed behind, holding their composure like it was the last bag on a sinking ship. Boone met them halfway down the driveway. No handshake, no welcome. Just a quiet nod before turning back toward the house. I opened the door without a word. No one smiled. We sat in the living room where the air was warmer than usual and the silence even warmer. Boone had made coffee, but no one touched it. My father started. "Francine, Boone, we appreciate you making time." "You didn't give us a choice," I said flatly. Mom cleared her throat. "We're in a difficult position. Merritt's firm has hit some unexpected complications." "Regulatory complications," Boone said. "Ones involving client money, retirement funds, SEC breathing down your neck, that sort of thing." Merritt's eye twitched. "We're not here to discuss the details." "Then why are you here?" I asked. Tess finally spoke, her tone sharp and brittle. "We're here because the family is in trouble, real trouble. And you're sitting on the only clean asset we have left." Boone folded his arms. "You've done your homework. I'm impressed." "We had the property appraised," my father added, sliding a folder across the table. "It's more valuable than we realized." Boone didn't look at it. "And?" "We need you to sell," Merritt said. "Liquidate the land, the structures, all of it. We already have potential buyers lined up. High-dollar offers." I laughed. Just once, but loud enough to make my mother flinch. "You want us to give up everything we've worked for so you can patch holes in a ship you sank yourselves." "It's not just about us," Tess said quickly. "Think about Audra. Think about the legacy." "Oh, don't drag Audra into this," I cut in. "She's not the one who shorted his own brother-in-law's company." Merritt froze. So did my father. Boone leaned forward slowly. "You thought I wouldn't find out?" Merritt's voice was low. It wasn't personal. It was business. Boone raised his eyebrows. "You bet against our company. You encouraged others to do the same. You risked your own family's retirement accounts hoping we'd fail." Silence. My mother wiped at her eyes. "Francine, we didn't know." "You didn't care to know," I said. Tess leaned in, desperate now. "This is bigger than pride. We're going to lose everything if we can't raise capital." "You mean the house in Lake Forest? The vacation condo in Vail? The private school tuition?" Boone asked. "You don't understand what it's like," my father snapped. "To have built a life of success and watch it crumble because of a miscalculation." Boone looked at him, steady. "I understand exactly what it's like." I was in Fallujah when a miscalculation cost a friend his legs. That shut him up. I stood, suddenly needing air but unwilling to leave. We've poured 10 years into this farm. You've mocked every square foot of it. And now it's your safety net. Your family, Mom said. Family helps each other. No, I said. Family respects each other. Family doesn't insult your choices and then ask you to undo them for their convenience. Tess's voice cracked. You'll regret this. Boone stood now, too. Calm, measured. I doubt it, he said. But you might. Merritt rose slowly, the folder still on the table. You'll come to your senses. Take your folder, I said. And your ego. Neither belong here. They left without another word. Through the window, I watched the Lincoln reverse down our driveway, kicking up another cloud of dust like they were trying to erase their tracks. Boone walked over, picked up the untouched coffee, and poured it down the sink. Didn't even bring their own sugar. I laughed again. This time, it felt better. I stood at the sink, watching the last swirl of coffee disappear, wondering how often I'd let them talk to me like that. Boone was already at the barn, running diagnostics on the irrigation line like any other day. But it wasn't. Something had shifted, and I knew he felt it too, even if he wouldn't say it out loud. Not yet. I walked out to the field where the air smelled like cut hay and something else, resolve. He looked up when I approached, wiping his hands on a shop towel that had long since given up being clean. You okay? He asked. I will be, I said, but I'm tired of pretending. We need to be clear about what this place really is. He slightly nodded like he'd been waiting for me to catch up. We show them? I asked. Yeah, he said. Let's show them. We spent the rest of the day pulling records, financial statements, patent documentation, email correspondence. Everything that proved Stone Applied Ag wasn't just a farm, but a machine. A quiet empire. Boone had started it with 3 ideas and a loan from a buddy who ran a supply chain cooperative. Now we have contracts with 7 states and 2 more. We didn't just grow things. We solved problems. Water shortages, yield inefficiencies, soil instability. Boone had developed tech that universities were just starting to study, and we were already deploying it. But we hadn't told anyone. Not because we were hiding, because we didn't need the noise. Until now. That night, I got a text from Aaron. They're coming back tomorrow. Dad says they'll bring lawyers this time. Boone read over my shoulder. Let them. We turned in early, but I couldn't sleep. I lay there listening to the wind rattle the porch swing and the dog shift on the floor. Boone breathed slowly beside me as if nothing had changed. But everything had. I got up around 4 a.m., poured a cup of stale coffee, and started printing. Labels, folders, signatures are highlighted in yellow. Every piece of our life is now cataloged for people who had never once cared to ask how we lived it. The sun rose red and sharp. At 10:01 a.m., the same black Navigator pulled up. A silver Lexus behind it this time. I didn't recognize the second man who stepped out, but the way he moved screamed, Legal counsel. Boone stood at the porch railing, arms crossed, calm as a storm front. I opened the door before they knocked. We brought someone, my father said. That explained it. Great, Boone said. So did we. Leonard Wise stepped out from our side door, briefcase in hand, tailored suit. He looked like he billed by the second. Shall we? He said, gesturing toward the dining table with files. Merritt's lawyer, Jeffress, thought this would be easy, but 10 minutes into the meeting, he realized he'd brought a knife to a gunfight. Leonard opened the conversation with asset records, property value, ownership, legal protections under the Department of Agriculture, and active federal grant coverage. Jeffress blinked. You're under federal contract? 3, Leonard replied. 1 with the USDA, 1 with NOAA, 1 with the Department of Defense. Merritt made a sound like he'd swallowed gravel. You're not just a farm, Jeffress said slowly. No, Boone said. We're a defense-affiliated agricultural R&D operation, and we're profitable. Leonard slid another folder across the table. More to the point, your clients lost money betting this operation would fail. That includes your own family's retirement accounts. Tess flinched. Leonard pressed. There are SEC compliance issues at stake. Merritt, would you like to explain to your lawyer how deeply you shorted Stone Applied Ag's stock last fall? Are you threatening us? My father asked, voice trembling. No, Leonard said. We're informing you. Threats come later. Merritt stood. This is a shakedown. No, I said, standing too. This is the moment you realize you underestimated the wrong people. I looked at Boone. He nodded once, and we handed them the packet labeled Disclosure Summary. Sealed. Signed. Dated. They'd come for a quick signature and a lifeline. What they got was a reckoning. I didn't offer them coffee. I offered them consequences. Merritt leaned over the table, trying to keep his voice low, like volume might hide the panic in his tone. You don't understand the position we're in. Leonard didn't blink. Oh, I understand. You leveraged other people's retirement accounts against a private company you didn't bother to vet. And now the floor dropped out from under you. You're not the first man to choke on his own arrogance. You won't be the last. Tess was quiet, eyes glued to the earnings chart Leonard had placed before her. I watched her lips move slightly, reading numbers she'd never imagined seeing in connection with my name. My dad cleared his throat. It's still family money. That land is not yours, Boone cut in, calm but with just enough steel to silence him. You didn't buy it. You didn't work it. You didn't build anything on it but your own assumptions. My mother turned to me, voice trembling. Beth, sweetheart, we're not the enemy. That was Rich. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. You know, Mom, it's funny. You all hated the military. You mocked Boone's service. But guess who helped fund our irrigation research? The Department of Defense. Guess who paid for half the startup with a veteran small business grant? She blinked, unsure whether to look impressed or insulted. I told you, Boone said quietly. We weren't wasting our lives. You just didn't listen. Merritt threw his hands up. This is ridiculous. None of this matters unless you're planning to take it public. Leonard tapped the folder. Already in motion. Quiet filing. Stone Applied Ag becomes a publicly traded entity in 90 days. And your attempted short position will be on record for any regulatory body that requests it. You're bluffing, Merritt said, but he didn't sound confident. Leonard didn't answer. He just smiled like a man who knew exactly how much the bluff was worth. And that it wasn't one. Tess reached for her daughter's hand, suddenly looking 10 years older. We didn't know, she whispered. That's the whole point, I said. You never asked. You never cared enough to even wonder what we were doing here, what we were building. You assumed small meant stupid, poor meant pitiful, and that love meant failure. I was scared, she said. We were losing everything. And now you want us to burn our lives down to rebuild yours? Beth, my dad started, we just need some time, some help. You have the means. And what would we get in return? I asked. Silence. Not forgiveness, Boone said. Not gratitude. Just the next demand when this patch job wears off. My mother sniffled and looked at me like the world had betrayed her. So that's it? You're just going to abandon your family? No, I said. You abandoned me a long time ago. I'm just finally recognizing it. Leonard packed the folders neatly, stood, and buttoned his jacket. If you'd like to discuss structured repayment plans, I can refer you to financial mediation. But let me be perfectly clear. Stone Applied Ag will not be liquidated, transferred, or sacrificed to cover your liabilities. Any legal attempts to pursue that route will be met with full counteraction. You can consider this meeting concluded. They didn't move right away. It was like they couldn't process what had just happened. They came to the farm thinking we were small and desperate, waiting for their approval. They left, realizing we didn't need their permission. Outside, the wind picked up. The screen door creaked as Leonard stepped off the porch. Merritt stalked off without a word. My parents trailed behind him, shell-shocked and slow. Tess paused at the bottom of the steps. Can I at least call you, just to talk? Boone looked at me. I said nothing. Tess swallowed. Right, of course. She turned away, shoulders tight, guiding her daughter back into the car. Boone and I watched them drive off. dust rising behind their tires like a closing curtain. Neither of us said a word. The truth didn't need repeating. I stayed by the window long after their car disappeared, not out of hope, they'd be back, but to remind myself why I wouldn't open the door. Boone stood behind me, silent, arms folded. When I turned, his eyes were calm and steady. "You okay?" "Not really," I said, "but I'm not falling apart either." We sat on the porch steps, watching the late sun stretch long over the fields. The rows of soybeans were neat and promising. It should have felt like peace. Instead, it felt like standing in the eye of a storm, still, but with wreckage on all sides. "You think they'll try anything else?" I asked. Boone shrugged. "Merritt? Probably. Your dad? Maybe. Tess? Number she looked done. She also looked like she might crack. She already did." I could still hear Leonard's voice echoing from the kitchen, precise and sharp as a scalpel. But it was Boone's voice I kept hearing, measured, resolved. The man who used to pace hospital floors and wake up from night sweats had calmly dismantled a family full of vultures without flinching. He hadn't just survived. He'd grown teeth. "I didn't know you had that in you," I said softly. He smirked. "They just gave me a reason." The next morning, we were in the greenhouse when the call came. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. I shouldn't have. It was Tess. Her voice was quiet, too calm. "Beth, I need to warn you." I stopped watering and turned off the hose. "What now?" "They're planning to go public with the story. Merritt's calling in favors, trying to spin the entire thing like you set them up. That Boone manipulated the company's growth to sink Merritt's investments." I almost laughed. "He bet against a company without doing research. That's not a setup. That's a bad gambler losing. They're not worried about truth, Beth. They're worried about narrative." Boone looked up when he saw my face. I held up a finger. Tess continued. "He's planning to leak it to a couple financial blogs. Might even push something through a cable business show. He wants to tank the IPO. Of course he does. I'm telling you because I don't think it'll work, but you deserve to know." I didn't say anything. I just let the silence sit. "Beth, I'm sorry. I should have seen this sooner." "You saw it," I said. "You just didn't care until it affected you." She hung up. I stared at my phone for a moment before handing it to Boone. "Here." He read the log and frowned. "You believe her?" "I believe Merritt would rather burn the house down than admit it's not his anymore." He walked out of the greenhouse, phone still in hand. A minute later, I heard him calling Leonard. By the afternoon, there was already chatter online. Some random subreddit posted a question about our company's funding sources. Another thread speculated that Boone had used inside military contacts to fake credentials. I rolled my eyes. By sunset, Leonard had issued a statement, calm and cold. Stone Applied Ag Technologies is in full compliance with all SEC regulations and federal contracts. Attempts to manufacture scandal will be treated as market manipulation and met with appropriate legal action. Boone added his message. Not through the press, not through lawyers. Just a direct post on the company's homepage. It read, "We don't grow crops with shortcuts. We don't build systems with spin. If you want scandal, go to the people who bet against feeding the world." We went to bed early that night, too tired to stay angry. I curled beside him and whispered, "Do you regret any of it?" He turned to me, face unreadable in the dark. "Not for a second. I thought I'd feel stronger after all this. Instead, I just feel hollow. That's what surviving does sometimes. Doesn't mean you're weak. Means you're human." I closed my eyes and let the quiet hold me. 2 days later, the SEC filed a formal inquiry into Merritt. Anonymous complaints had surfaced, citing manipulation, misuse of client funds, and undeclared personal interests in targeted short positions. I didn't submit anything. Neither did Boone. It turns out the market has its way of balancing books. The phone didn't ring again. Not from Tess, not from my parents, not from Merritt. Boone didn't ask why, and I didn't bring it up. We didn't need to. The silence was answer enough. The farm stayed busy. Orders doubled. A university from Colorado reached out about a research collaboration. Boone got invited to speak at a Veterans in Tech Symposium. I started teaching local workshops again, mainly for the wives and kids of other vets trying to rebuild something of their own. One afternoon, a woman came up to me after class, mid-30s, worn baseball cap, hands tougher than mine. I heard about what you did, she said. Standing up to your family like that. I smiled but didn't say anything. I just wanted to say, it helps, seeing someone win without playing their game. That night, I told Boone. He didn't say much, just nodded and went back to seating starter trays. But I saw his jaw ease a little, like the weight wasn't crushing anymore, just heavy, manageable, like we'd traded in resentment for something real. I ran my fingers through the fresh soil in the seed trays, half listening to Boone hum through a tune he didn't know he was humming. I didn't ask what song it was. I didn't need to. It was the sound of someone finally at peace. The knock came late, almost dusk. 1, 2, pause. Then 3, not impatient, just uncertain. I dried my hands and opened the door. Ruth stood there, no makeup. Hair pulled back in a loose, trembling bun. No blazer, no pretense, just Ruth. She held a crumpled envelope in both hands like it might disappear if she let go. Can I come in? I looked past her. No car in sight. You walked? She nodded. From the corner, I stepped aside. Boone stayed in the kitchen, eyes on a spreadsheet, but his ears tuned in. Ruth sat on the couch like someone who had never learned how to sit without performing. Even now, I could see her trying to measure how small to make herself. She held the envelope out. These are my words, not Jack's, not Dad's, just mine. I didn't take it. You can say them out loud, her throat bobbed. I was cruel to you, Frankie. I thought if I kept you in a box, quiet, small, I'd be safe. I thought if I mocked Boone, I could prove to myself that what I had was better. Turns out I was wrong on both counts. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Took you long enough. I know, she whispered. I let them tear you down for years, and I never once asked myself what it cost you, or what it cost me. She looked around the room. It was clean but plain. A few pictures, a bookshelf, worn couch. I used to think you had nothing, she said, but you've got everything that actually matters. I sat down across from her. You're not here for money, she shook her head hard. Not a cent. I'm here because you're the only person I know who ever stood up when it counted. And because I couldn't keep living like I mattered more, just because I married into a country club. I let her words sit there. Boone got up quietly, poured her a glass of water, and walked it over. She took it with both hands like he was handing her trust. You remember when you left for Fort Bragg? She asked suddenly. Mom said you were just playing G.I. Jane, that you'd be back before you broke a nail. I remembered every word of it. Well, you didn't come back broken, she said. You came back rebuilt, stronger, wiser, and I spent years pretending you were just lucky. You were scared, I said. She nodded. Still am. I waited. She took a shaky breath. I filed for divorce yesterday. Jack doesn't know yet. He'll find out when the papers hit his desk. That made me sit up. Are you serious? Dead serious. And I've got no money, no house, no backup plan. Just a suitcase and a sister I don't deserve. The silence filled everything that hadn't been said. I've been angry at you for so long, I finally said. But the truth is, I missed you more than I hated you. Her eyes filled with tears. You really mean that? I looked at Boone. He gave the slightest nod. Just enough. You'll take the guest room, I said, and you'll pull your weight. She laughed through tears. Deal. We ate soup that night. Simple. Nothing fancy. She helped with dishes like she'd always lived here. When she reached to dry the last plate, Boone handed her a towel. Welcome home, he said. Ruth looked like he'd handed her the moon. No one said anything else that night. No speeches, no promises. Just the sound of water draining and spoons hitting ceramic. And it felt like something broken had started to heal for the first time in years. Ruth folded the dish towel 3 times before setting it down like she needed to prove she still knew how to care for something. She stood by the sink, shoulders hunched, fingers twitching like they wanted to regain control. Boone watched from the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, not saying a word. I stayed seated, arms braced on the table, staring at the untouched mug before me. No one moved, no one breathed. "You want me to say I'm sorry?" Ruth finally asked. "Because I am. I didn't know what Chase was doing." "You knew something," I said flatly. Her eyes snapped up, watery and sharp. "I knew he was reckless. I knew he made stupid bets. I didn't know he'd gamble your parents' future. Or yours." I pushed the mug away. "You helped them get this far. You vouched for him. You brought his mess into my house. You stood next to them while they ran me down for years." "I thought I was keeping peace," she whispered. "No," Boone said, stepping forward. "You were keeping quiet. That's not the same," she flinched. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," I answered. "That's the difference now. I don't want anything from you, and I'm not giving anything either." She slumped into the chair across from me. The same chair she used to lecture me from when I was 17 and dared to apply to a state school instead of some Ivy her husband could brag about. Now, she just looked hollow. "Your father's not eating," she said, like that would make me fold. "He always cared more about what other people were eating." "He's not well, Francine." Boone shook his head. "Don't." Ruth turned to him. "You have no idea what this is like. Watching everything you've built disappear overnight." "I do," Boone said coldly. "Try waking up every day in a war zone. Try burying friends younger than your son. Try coming home with half a mind and nobody knowing what to do with you. You want pity? You're decades late." Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. "We're done apologizing for surviving," I said. "And we're done playing the dutiful daughter and son-in-law while your golden boy rots everything he touches." "But family, you taught us what that word means," I cut in. "And it doesn't mean loyalty without limits." She sat frozen, like something in her had cracked. Boone's chair scraped back as he stood. "I need air," he muttered, disappearing through the back door. Ruth and I were alone again, just like that. "I miss my daughters," she said quietly. "You miss control. I miss when we could all sit at a table and not hate each other." "Then maybe you should have spoken up when I was being humiliated at every holiday dinner." She looked down at her lap. "I didn't think you'd ever leave." I leaned forward. "That's the problem. You all thought I never would. You thought I'd keep showing up, taking scraps, and calling it love. You counted on me staying small." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was clean. "I'll go," she said softly, standing. "But if you ever—" "No conditions," I interrupted. "If you come back here again, it's as a guest. You show respect or you don't come at all." She nodded once. "Understood." I didn't walk her out. I didn't hug her goodbye. I didn't check the window to watch her leave. I stayed at the table and let the quiet fill the house. Then I got up, poured the cold coffee down the sink, and opened the barn door to let the wind in. I leaned into the doorway, watching Boone rake through the compost pile like he was churning up more than soil. He caught my eyes, then the shift in my stance. "You good?" he asked, not stopping his rhythm. "I'm not sure," I answered, "but I know I'm not uncertain anymore." Boone set the rake aside, walked over, and kissed my forehead. "That's something." That evening, we hosted a quiet dinner on the porch. Ruth brought cornbread, and Will brought his teenage son, Ben. They weren't guests anymore. They were something closer to family than anyone sharing my blood had managed to be. Halfway through dinner, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Boone gave me a look. I answered. "Francine?" Tessa's voice came through, cracked, controlled. "You've made your point." "Have I?" I sipped my tea. "I'm not asking for money, or land, or help. Can we talk?" "No," I said. "We've already had the only conversation that ever mattered." "And you weren't listening." Silence. Then, "I didn't know." You didn't want to know. Click. Boone reached over and gently took my phone, setting it upside down. You don't need her voice in your head anymore, he said. I know, and yet it's still been there. I let out a breath. But I think today was the first time it echoed back, and I didn't flinch. Later, when Ruth was gone, and Ben was helping his dad rinse dishes, Boone and I walked out into the field. Fireflies blinked like signals in the dark. The scent of basil and damp grass clung to the air. I used to think peace would feel like a finish line, I said. Turns out it just feels quiet, and steady, and earned. You want to know something? Boone asked. Always. I never thought we were small. Not even once. Not when we were broke. Not when we were overlooked. Not when your dad made that speech at our wedding. That speech made me feel like a stain on a napkin, I said with a laugh. Yeah, but that's because you spent too long thinking your family's opinion was a mirror instead of a lie. Boone turned to me. You're the strongest woman I've ever known. And I was married to the army for 12 years. I smiled. It's a hell of a second marriage. Best I ever had. We sat in the dirt for a while, watching the night crawling around us. Boone pulled me into the crook of his shoulder. I let myself lean. No big final confrontation, no court order, no apology letter arrived in the mail. Just quiet. A week later, I got a certified letter from a firm in Charleston. It was a formal notice. The Stroud family estate had gone into foreclosure. No signature from Tess. No note. I showed it to Boone. He nodded once and said, "Let it rot." So I did. That fall, the community center opened on the edge of our land, built with the grant money Boone and I secured. Designed for veterans, struggling families, and anyone tired of hearing the door slam in their faces. We named it The Crossing. At the ribbon cutting, a little girl named Lila asked me if I was famous. I bent down and said, "Only to the right people." Boone shook every hand. I watched him laugh with a man in a wheelchair who'd once served under his command. I watched Will and Ben hang solar panels, and Ruth served beans from our field like fine cuisine. Audra showed up too, quiet, alone. She didn't ask for anything, just stayed late and helped clean up. She hugged me before she left and whispered, "I finally see it. I'm sorry it took this long." I stood on the porch with Boone as the last guest drifted down the gravel road that night. The porch light buzzed. The cicadas hummed. I used to think revenge meant striking back, I said. Now I think it just means choosing not to stay broken. Boone took my hand and said, "And maybe building something better in the wreckage." We stood there, hand in hand, the glow of the crossing visible from where we stood. I thought of all my years chasing approval, mistaking cruelty for closeness. I thought of my father's voice, Tessa's smirk, and every holiday where my silence was the price of peace. And I thought of this life now, built in dirt, love, fire-tested faith. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and it was enough. I used to think survival meant staying quiet, taking the hits, making myself small enough to pass through the cracks without making a sound. But now I know better. It wasn't the fight that changed me. It was the decision to stop asking for permission. I want to stop waiting for someone else to see my worth before I can stand in it. They didn't break me. They just showed me where I needed to grow roots. And from here on out, I don't shrink for anyone. I don't bend for comfort. I keep building. I keep planting. I keep choosing myself out loud. If you've ever felt like the black sheep in your family or found strength in choosing your path, stick around. This channel dives deep into family stories, especially where revenge isn't about getting even. It's about getting free. Hit subscribe for more true-to-life family revenge stories that remind us that sometimes walking away is the strongest thing you can do.